The man in the $3,000 hiking jacket laughed, so hard his voice echoed off the ridge. Look at this. A homeless guy playing survivalist in the woods. Preston Aldrich stepped closer, phone already raised to capture the moment. The figure before him did not move, did not flinch, just stood there in a faded olive field jacket held together with careful stitches, boots worn through at the soles, gray beard grown wild against weathered skin. What Preston did not know, what none of them would know for the next 47 minutes, was that they had just walked onto the property of the most lethal soldier in American Special Operations history. And by the time they understood that truth, their lives would never be the same. The trail crossing sat at the western edge of Elias Crenshaw's 47 acres, marked by weathered no trespassing signs posted every 100 yards along the boundary. The four hikers had passed 6 of those signs already. They had photographed 3 of them for social media, laughing about the crazy mountain man who thought he could keep people off public trails. Preston turned to his companions with that smile he had perfected at Princeton, the one that said he owned everything his eyes touched. Can you believe this? He gestured at Elias with his trekking pole. We have a genuine hermit, a real-life Unabomber type. Brock Henley moved up beside Preston, phone already recording. His frame was thick from years of lacrosse and weekend weight training, and he used his size the way some men used money. Blocking the trail, intimidating anyone who might challenge his friend. This is going to get so many views, he said. Crazy homeless guy confrontation in the wild. Elias said nothing. His pale blue eyes moved across the group with an economy of motion that seemed out of place on a man who looked like he had not bathed in weeks. He counted 4. Noted positions, registered the woman with the phone, narrating everything to her followers, the other man hanging back with his arms crossed, the 2 in front who had already decided he was nothing. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, we would love to know where you're joining us from. Drop a comment below with your city or country. And if stories like this one about the quiet heroes hiding in plain sight speak to you, please consider subscribing. Your support helps us to share more incredible stories about the people the world overlooks. Now, let us continue. This is private property. Elias's voice came out like gravel over stone, rough from disuse. You passed 6 signs. Preston's laugh cut through the mountain air. Private property, right? And I suppose you own 47 acres of mountain land. He turned to Vanessa, who was filming everything. Get this guy. Claims he owns half the ridge. Vanessa Caldwell-Pierce angled her phone for a better shot, her voice carrying that performative tone she used when she knew her followers were watching. Okay, so we're literally being confronted by a homeless man who thinks he owns the mountain. This is not a drill. This is happening right now. Elias remained still, his weight balanced on both feet, his hands loose at his sides. Anyone who had served would have recognized the posture instantly. The readiness. The absolute calm that came from decades of knowing exactly what his body could do if required. But these 4 had never served, had never met anyone who moved the way operators moved. They saw only the surface, the grime, the poverty, the appearance of nothing. Chad Whitfield stepped forward from the back of the group, his hedge fund confidence pushing him past whatever small instinct for caution he might have possessed. Listen, old-timer, we're going to keep hiking. You can call whoever you want. By the time anyone gets up here, we will be long gone. So why do you not just shuffle back to whatever hole you crawled out of? Something shifted in Elias then. Not visibly, not in any way the 4 could perceive. But somewhere behind his eyes, a door opened onto a room he kept locked. A room filled with the faces of 8 men who had trusted him with their lives. Men whose dog tags hung on a cord against his chest at this very moment. Hidden beneath 3 layers of clothing, still carrying traces of their blood in the stamped letters of their names. He thought about stepping aside, letting them pass. Returning to his cabin and his silence and the daily patrol route he walked at 0347 every morning, the exact moment his team had died on a mountain 8,000 miles away. He had built this life specifically to avoid moments like this one. Moments where he might have to remember who he used to be, but they were still recording, still laughing. And something in the woman's narration, something in the casual cruelty of her voice, as she described him for strangers to mock, held him in place. "I'm asking you to leave." His voice did not rise, did not sharpen, just laid the words down like stones. "This is your last chance to turn around." Preston's smile widened. He loved these moments. The confrontations that went viral. The clips that got shared and reshared until everyone knew how clever he was, how dominant, how untouchable. Last chance? He stepped closer, close enough that Elias could smell the expensive cologne fighting against trail sweat. "What exactly are you going to do, old man? Bore us to death with your war stories?" He did not know why he said war stories. Something about the way the hermit stood, perhaps. Some unconscious recognition his brain processed, but his arrogance refused to acknowledge. Elias looked at him for a long moment, looked at all of them, and in that silence, something passed across his face that made Brock's phone hand waver for just a fraction of a second before steadying again. "I'm going to ask you one more time. Then I'm going to call the sheriff. And after that, what happens next will not be my choice anymore." Preston was already pulling out his own phone. "Perfect. Call your sheriff. Let him come up here and explain to you how public trails work." He turned to his friends with theatrical exasperation. Can you imagine? A homeless squatter threatening to call the cops on us? But what Preston Aldrich did not know, what none of them knew, was that they were not looking at a homeless squatter. They were looking at the most decorated survivor of the deadliest special operations mission of the Afghan War. And in exactly 43 minutes, when Sheriff Emmett Navarro arrived at this trail crossing and saw the cord of dog tags hanging from the torn collar of that faded jacket, everything these four people believed about power and worth and the measure of a man would come crashing down around them. The morning of October 14th, 2011 had started with coffee that tasted like motor oil and a sunrise that painted the Hindu Kush in shades of blood and gold. Elias remembered standing outside the firebase with Captain Nathan Vickers, both of them watching the light crawl across peaks that had swallowed armies for centuries. "You ever think about what comes after?" Vickers had asked, his breath fogging in the mountain cold. After all this? Elias had shrugged. After was a word that belonged to other people. People who had not spent 23 years moving from one war to the next, one target package to the next, one mission brief to the next. After was a country he had never visited. "I am thinking a cabin," Vickers continued. "Somewhere in the mountains back home. Maybe Virginia. Maybe Carolina. Somewhere I can see terrain like this without anyone trying to kill me in it." Elias had smiled at that. At the image of Vic, who had led more classified operations than most generals would ever know existed, sitting on a porch somewhere watching leaves change color. "You will be bored inside a week." "Probably." Vickers turned to face him, and something in his expression shifted. "But I would be alive. And so would you. That is the deal, Timber. We get through tonight. We both go find our mountains. Promise me." Elias had promised. 8 hours later, he held Vic in his arms on a ridgeline at 11,000 feet, while his team leader bled out from 7 rounds that should have hit Elias instead. And the last thing Nathan Vickers ever said, with blood bubbling between his lips and his eyes, already going glassy, was "not your fault. Never your fault. Go find your mountain." The memory released him like a hand letting go of a throat. Elias blinked, and he was back on his own mountain, his own ridge, with 4 strangers who had no idea what lived behind his eyes. Preston was still talking into his phone, dramatic outrage painting every word. "Yes, I need to report a threatening individual. Some homeless man claiming to own property up on the Western Ridge Trail. He is blocking our path and making verbal threats." His eyes cut to Elias with satisfaction. "That is right. We will wait right here." Elias said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence unnerved people more than any words could. In the interrogation rooms of black sites that did not exist, he had watched hardened fighters break simply because he refused to fill the empty air. These were not hardened anything. They were soft in ways they did not even understand. Soft in their certainty. Soft in their assumptions. Soft in their absolute belief that money and status made them untouchable. Brock had lowered his phone slightly, though the red recording light still blinked. Something about the hermit's stillness was starting to bother him. Most homeless guys he had encountered in the city either shuffled away when confronted or got loud and aggressive. This one did neither. He just stood there like he was waiting for something, like he knew something they did not. "So what is your deal anyway?" Brock asked, trying to reclaim the energy of the confrontation. "You some kind of veteran? One of those guys who came back all messed up and decided to live in the woods?" The question hung in the air. Elias felt the weight of 8 dog tags shift against his chest, felt the familiar pressure of names he carried with him every moment of every day. Donovan Keel, Marcus Webb, Terrence Okonkwo, Julian Reeves, Aaron Whitmore, Randall Cobb, Dariush Amati, and Nathan Vickers. His brothers. His responsibility. His failure. Something like that, he said finally. Vanessa stepped closer, her phone catching every detail of his weathered face. "Oh my God," she narrated to her followers. "He is literally admitting to being one of those broken veteran types. This is so sad. Like, get some help, right? There are programs for people like you." Elias looked at her, really looked, saw the designer hiking gear that had never touched real wilderness, saw the manicured nails wrapped around a phone worth more than everything he owned, saw the absolute absence of anything resembling understanding in her eyes. "There are," he agreed quietly, "not many that work." The response seemed to confuse her. She had expected defensiveness or shame, not this quiet acknowledgement that carried neither. For just a moment, her narration faltered. Chad filled the silence with another laugh, though this one carried a slight edge. "Listen, man, I do not know what your story is, and frankly, I do not care. We paid good money to hike these trails, and we're not going to be stopped by some crazy old-timer with delusions of property ownership." "I have the deed," Elias said, "in my cabin, about half a mile east." "Sure you do." Preston pocketed his phone with a smirk. "And I have the deed to Manhattan in my back pocket. Look, the sheriff is on his way. When he gets here, we will sort this all out. Probably find out this land belongs to the Forest Service, and you have been squatting here illegally for years." "6 years," Elias said. "Bought it in 2012. Something about the specificity of the answer made Preston's smirk flicker. But only for a moment. People who looked like this man did not own property. People who looked like this man slept under bridges and begged for change. The world had rules, and Preston had spent his entire life learning that those rules always bent in his favor. Half a mile to the east, in a cabin built by hands that had once held the most advanced weapons systems in the American arsenal, a photograph hung on the wall. 8 faces smiled out from that frame. 8 men in full kit, weapons slung, standing in front of a helicopter that would carry them to an extraction point that had already been compromised. The photograph had been taken at 0600 on October 14th, 2011. By midnight, 7 of those faces would be dead, and the 8th would spend the next 72 hours fighting his way down a mountain alone, carrying his team leader's body across 11,000 feet of hostile terrain, killing 94 enemy fighters with nothing but a rifle, a pistol, and a knife when the ammunition ran out. Elias touched the core beneath his jacket, felt the familiar edges of the tags, spoke to them silently the way he did every morning at 0347 when he climbed to the eastern ridge. Still here, brothers. Still trying. He had watched them die one by one over 72 hours. And every morning at 0347, he climbed to the eastern ridge to apologize for surviving. The standoff stretched across 20 minutes before the sound of an engine echoed up from the Forest Service road below. Preston's face lit with satisfaction. He straightened his jacket and ran a hand through his hair, preparing for an audience. "Finally, now we will see how tough you are when actual authority shows up." Elias did not respond. He had not moved from his position at the trail crossing, weight balanced, hands loose, eyes tracking the tree line with an awareness none of them understood. He had heard the vehicle 3 minutes before they did, had identified it as a single truck, probably a pickup or SUV based on the engine note, moving at roughly 25 miles per hour on the gravel access road. Old habits, the kind that kept you alive when nothing else would. Sheriff Emmett Navarro emerged from the trees 10 minutes later, slightly winded from the 2-mile hike up from the road. He was a thick man in his mid-50s, with a gray mustache and the kind of calm demeanor that came from decades of handling situations that could go sideways in a heartbeat. His eyes swept the scene once, taking in the four hikers with their expensive gear and phones, then settling on the figure in the worn field jacket. Something shifted in Navarro's expression, something that none of the hikers caught. "Sheriff, thank God." Preston stepped forward with his hand extended. "Preston Aldrich. I called about the situation. This individual has been blocking our path and making threats. He claims to own this property, which is clearly ridiculous." Navarro did not shake the offered hand. His eyes remained on Elias. "Mr. Crenshaw." The name landed like a stone in still water. Preston's hand hung in the air for a moment before slowly dropping. "You know this guy?" Brock asked, incredulity sharpening his voice. "I know of him." Navarro moved past Preston without acknowledgement, approaching Elias with a different energy entirely. "Everything all right up here?" Elias nodded once. "Just some hikers who got lost." "We did not get lost." Vanessa's voice cut in, indignation rising. "We were on the Western Ridge Trail, and this man blocked our path. He has been threatening us for almost half an hour." Navarro turned to face her. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes made her phone hand waver. "The Western Ridge Trail ends at the Forest Service boundary, ma'am. About a quarter-mile back. Everything past that point is private property." "That is impossible," Chad said. "There were no signs." "There are 6 signs between the boundary and this location," Navarro replied evenly. "Posted every 100 yards according to county regulations. I installed 3 of them myself." The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. Preston recovered first, his confidence dented but not broken. "Fine. So we missed a few signs. That does not give this man the right to threaten us. He said things would happen to us if we did not leave. He was menacing." Navarro looked at Elias. "That true?" "I asked them to leave." Elias's voice remained level. 6 times. They declined. "He is lying." Brock stepped forward, his size meant to intimidate. "He was aggressive from the moment we got here. Probably mentally ill. You should arrest him for our protection." For the first time, something flickered across Navarro's face. Something that looked almost like anger, though it passed too quickly to be certain. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back." "Excuse me?" "Step back. Now." The command in Navarro's voice was unmistakable. Brock hesitated, then retreated 2 steps. His phone was still recording, capturing everything for an audience that would never see it the way he intended. Navarro turned back to the group. "Here is what is going to happen. You are going to turn around and walk back down to the Forest Service Road. You're going to get in your vehicles, and you're going to leave this mountain. If I find out you have trespassed on private property again, I will cite you. If I find out you have harassed this property owner again, I will arrest you. Is that clear?" Preston's face flushed red. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "I'm a managing partner at Aldrich Capital. My family has been in Virginia for 7 generations. I will have your badge for this." Navarro smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "Sir, I have been sheriff of this county for 16 years. I have been threatened by people who actually had the power to follow through. You are not one of them." He pointed down the trail. "Walk." "This is outrageous." Vanessa was already composing her post in her head, already imagining the outrage she would generate. "We are going to report this. We are going to report you. We are going to report him. This is not over." She was right about one thing. It was not over, because at that moment, a second vehicle could be heard making its way up the Forest Service Road. And in that vehicle sat Deputy Cassandra Reeves, who had insisted on providing backup even though Navarro told her it was unnecessary. Deputy Reeves, whose uncle had served in special operations. Deputy Reeves, who carried a photograph of that uncle on her dashboard, a photograph taken on the morning of October 14, 2011, in front of a helicopter in Afghanistan. A photograph that included 8 smiling faces, one of whom was now standing at a trail crossing in the Blue Ridge Mountains, wearing a torn field jacket and the weight of everyone he had failed to save. Preston's hand was already reaching for his phone when the sheriff's cruiser appeared at the trailhead, and that was when everything began to unravel. The ambush came at 2,347 hours, 13 minutes before extraction. Elias had known something was wrong the moment they reached the rally point. The silence was too complete. No insects, no wind through the scrub brush. Just the kind of stillness that preceded violence in places where violence was the only language anyone spoke. "Vic," he had whispered into his radio. "Something is off." But before his team leader could respond, the mountainside erupted. The first RPG hit their position from a window in a compound they had cleared twice on the way up. Donovan Keel, point man, call sign Irish, took the blast full in the chest. He was dead before his body hit the ground. 26 years old. A wife in San Diego. A daughter he had never met. The second RPG came 3 seconds later, and then the small arms fire opened up from 3 directions at once. 200 fighters, maybe more, pouring out of positions that should have been empty, firing from angles that should have been covered. Marcus Webb threw himself onto the grenade that landed in their center. Hammer, the breacher who could open any door, defeat any obstacle. He had 2 seconds to make the choice, and he made it without hesitation. His body absorbed the blast that would have killed 4 of them. He was 31. His mother still sent him cookies every month. Elias remembered the next 11 hours in fragments. Terrence Okonkwo, Sparks, taking 3 rounds to the back while trying to reach the emergency frequency. Julian Reeves, Doc, bleeding out with his hands still pressed against a wound he was trying to close on someone else. Aaron Whitmore, Shade, the sniper who had saved Elias's life a dozen times, finally missing the shot that mattered when exhaustion made his hands shake. By dawn, only 3 of them were still breathing. Elias, Vic, and Randall Cobb, Boom, the demolitions expert who had used his last charge to collapse a tunnel and buy them another hour. Boom died at 0915, holding a photograph of his twin sons. And then it was just Elias and Vic fighting their way down a mountain that seemed determined to kill them both. 11,000 feet of hostile terrain. Enemy fighters around every ridge. Ammunition running low, then running out entirely. Vic took the 7 rounds at 1847 on the second day. They came from a position Elias should have seen, should have cleared, should have neutralized before his team leader stepped into the kill zone. But he had been looking the wrong way for half a second, and in combat, half a second was eternity. He caught Vic as he fell, held him as the blood poured out faster than any pressure could stop. Listen to the man who had led him through a dozen wars whisper those final words. "Not your fault, Timber. Never your fault. Go find your mountain." Elias carried him down the remaining 3,000 feet. Carried him through 2 more firefights, killing with a knife when the bullets were gone. Carried him all the way to the extraction point where a helicopter finally appeared, 47 hours late, to find one man standing in a field of enemy dead with his team leader's body cradled in his arms. 94 confirmed kills. That was what the after-action report said. 94 enemy fighters neutralized by a single operator over 72 hours of continuous combat. They gave him the Distinguished Service Cross for it. Gave him commendations that would remain classified for decades. Gave him everything except the one thing he actually wanted. His brother's back. The memory released him, and Elias found himself gripping the cord of dog tags so tightly that the metal edges had drawn blood from his palm. He was back on his mountain, his ridge, the place Vic had told him to find. But Vic was not here. None of them were. Just their tags pressing against his chest. Just their names carved into his memory like coordinates on a map. Just their faces watching him from a photograph in a cabin half a mile away. The sound of a second vehicle door closing echoed up from below. Footsteps on the trail. Someone climbing toward them with purpose. Elias wiped the blood from his palm on his jacket and waited. He had gotten good at waiting over the past 6 years. Good at standing still while the world moved around him. Good at being invisible in plain sight. But something was different today. Something in the air. Something in the way the sheriff had looked at him. Something in the approaching footsteps that carried an energy he could not quite name. Deputy Cassandra Reeves appeared at the edge of the clearing 3 minutes later, her hand resting on her service weapon out of habit. She was young, late 20s, dark hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail, and something in her face, something in the shape of her eyes and the set of her jaw, hit Elias like a rifle round to the chest. She looked like Julian, the medic, the one who died with his hands still trying to save someone else. She looked like document Captain Vickers had died with those words on his lips. Not your fault, Timber. Never your fault. But Elias had carried those words like a sentence ever since. Deputy Reeves stopped at the edge of the clearing, her eyes moving across the scene with trained precision. For civilians in expensive hiking gear, faces flushed with indignation. Sheriff Navarro standing between them and a man in a torn field jacket who looked like he had not seen civilization in years. Tension thick enough to choke on. Sheriff. She nodded to Navarro. Dispatch said you might need backup. Navarro shook his head slightly. Situation is under control. These folks were just leaving. We are not going anywhere. Preston stepped forward, emboldened by the arrival of another officer. Not until someone explains why we are being treated like criminals when this man is clearly the one breaking the law. He is living in the woods like an animal. He threatened us. And now you expect us to just walk away? Deputy Reeves looked at Elias for the first time. Really looked, and something passed across her face that she could not quite name. A flicker of recognition that made no sense. A feeling that she had seen this man before, though she knew with certainty that she had not. Sir, she said carefully, are you the property owner? Elias nodded once. His eyes had not left her face since she emerged from the tree lane. The resemblance was striking. The same high cheekbones, the same determined set of the jaw, the same quiet intensity in the eyes that Doc had carried through every mission, every firefight, every moment when lesser men would have broken. He wanted to ask her name, wanted to know if the connection he sensed was real or just the desperate pattern matching of a damaged mind. But he could not make his mouth form the words. This is insane. Vanessa thrust her phone toward Deputy Reeves, the screen filled with her recording of the confrontation. Look at this. Look at how he was acting. He is clearly unstable. He should be in a facility somewhere, not wandering around the mountains threatening innocent people. Deputy Reeves did not look at the phone. Her eyes remained on Elias, studying him with an intensity that made Preston uncomfortable for reasons he could not articulate. How long have you lived up here? She asked. 6 years. Elias's voice came out steadier now. Since 2012. And you own the property legally? 47 acres. Deed is in my cabin. Deputy Reeves nodded slowly. She had dealt with enough veterans to recognize the bearing, the economy of movement, the way he held himself like a man who had spent decades in places where relaxation meant death. Her uncle had stood the same way. In the photographs her mother kept on the mantle. In the single video that existed of him, taken 3 weeks before he deployed for the last time. Sheriff, she said quietly, I do not think we have a trespassing situation here. I think we have a property owner who has been harassed by hikers who ignored clearly posted signs. Thank you, Deputy. Navarro's voice carried approval. That is my assessment as well. Preston's face went through several shades of red before settling on purple. This is a conspiracy. You people know each other. You are protecting this vagrant because he is one of your local crazies and you do not want the liability. Well, I have attorneys. I have connections. And I promise you, when I am done, you will both be looking for new careers. Navarro smiled, that unfriendly smile again. Sir, I'm going to give you one more chance to walk down this mountain under your own power. After that, my options become significantly less pleasant. Brock had been quiet for the past several minutes, but something was bothering him. Something about the way the sheriff and deputy were treating this homeless-looking hermit. The deference in their voices, the careful distance they maintained, the way they never quite turned their backs on him. He stepped closer to Elias, close enough to see the details that distance had obscured. The scars on his hands, the way his fingers were positioned, relaxed but ready. The faded edges of something dark peeking above the collar of his jacket. Not dirt. Ink. What is that? Brock pointed at Elias's neck. You got tattoos under there? Elias did not move, did not answer, but something in his stillness intensified. Brock, leave it alone. Even Chad could sense the shift in atmosphere. Let us just go. No, I want to see. Brock's hand shot out before anyone could stop him, grabbing the collar of Elias's jacket and yanking it down. Fabrice Tola. Buttons scattered across the dirt. And suddenly, in the harsh mountain light, everything was visible. The cord of dog tags. 8 of them, hanging against a chest crossed with scars that told stories of violence most people could not imagine. And above them, crawling up toward his throat, a tattoo. Coordinates. A date. Names written in script so small they were almost illegible. And, at the center, an emblem that made Deputy Reeves's breath catch in her throat. The Delta Force insignia. The same one her uncle had worn on his shoulder in every photograph she had ever seen of him. Sheriff Navarro's eyes dropped to the cord barely visible beneath the torn collar. He counted. 8 tags. His hand began to tremble. The clearing went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. 8 tags. Navarro's voice was barely a whisper. His face had gone pale beneath his tan, and his hand had moved unconsciously to his own chest, where his ranger tab lay hidden beneath his uniform. 8 tags. Brock still had a fistful of torn fabric in his hand, but his confidence had evaporated. He stared at the metal rectangles glinting in the sunlight, at the cord that held them, at the scars that crisscrossed the chest beneath. He had expected to find nothing, proof that the hermit was a fraud. Instead, he had uncovered something that made his stomach drop. What does that mean? Vanessa's phone was still recording, but her voice had lost its performative edge. 8 tags. So what? Navarro did not answer her. His eyes were fixed on Elias, seeing him for the first time. Not the hermit. Not the recluse who had bought 47 acres of mountain land and disappeared from the world. Something else entirely. Those are not yours, he said quietly. Not all of them. Elias shook his head once. 7 belonged to my team. Belonged, Navarro corrected, and the word came out rough. Belong. Elias's voice carried the weight of 12 years of grief. They still belonged to them. I just carry them now. Deputy Reeves had not moved since the tags were exposed. Her eyes were locked on the tattoo that crawled up Elias's chest toward his throat. The coordinates she did not recognize. The date she could not read from this distance. But the insignia at the center was burned into her memory. She had traced that same symbol on her uncle's shoulder in photographs since she was 7 years old. Delta, she breathed. You were Delta. It was not a question. Elias met her eyes and saw Julian looking back at him. The same intensity, the same unshakable focus, the same quiet strength that had made Doc the heart of their team, the one they all trusted to keep them alive when everything went wrong. Yes. Preston laughed, but the sound was hollow now. It scraped against the silence like metal on stone. Oh, come on. This is ridiculous. You probably bought those online. Probably looked up what Special Forces tattoos look like and got one to impress people. You cannot seriously believe this homeless drifter was some kind of elite soldier. No one acknowledged him. It was as if he had ceased to exist. Navarro took a step closer to Elias, his movements careful, almost reverent. What operation? The question hung in the air. Elias felt the familiar weight of classified information pressing against his tongue. The debriefings that had lasted weeks. The paperwork he had signed. The explicit instructions that what happened on that mountain was never to be discussed outside secure facilities. But the paperwork was 12 years old now. The classification had been downgraded in 2019. And these people, with their phones and their arrogance, had dragged the past into the present whether he wanted it or not. Ridgeline, he said. October 2011. Hindu Kush. Navarro closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. I studied that operation. At Ranger School, they use it as a case study in survival against impossible odds. He paused, his voice breaking slightly. They told us the survivor died of his wounds 2 weeks after extraction. Elias shook his head. They told everyone that. Easier than explaining why I disappeared. Deputy Reeves felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Her mind was racing, pulling together pieces that had never fit before. October 2011. Her uncle Julian had died in October 2011. In Afghanistan. in a classified operation that the family was never told details about. All they knew was that his team had been ambushed during extraction, that he had died trying to save his brothers, that his body had been recovered by a fellow soldier who carried him off the mountain. The date on the tattoo. She needed to see the date. She moved before she realized what she was doing, stepping past Navarro, past the stunned hikers, until she was standing directly in front of Elias. Close enough to read the ink on his skin. Close enough to see the individual scars. Close enough to smell wood smoke and pine and something underneath that might have been grief. The coordinates first. 35.2847 degrees north. 71.1753 degrees east. They meant nothing to her. Then the date. October 14th, 2011. Her uncle's death date. The date that had been carved into a headstone in Arlington. The date her mother lit a candle for every single year. And in the names. Tiny script circling the Delta insignia like a protective ring. Gill, Webb, Okonkwo, Reeves, Whitmore, Cobb, Amati, Vickers, Reeves. Her legs buckled. Navarro caught her before she hit the ground. Deputy. His voice was sharp with concern. Deputy Reeves. Cassandra. She could not speak, could not breathe, could only stare at the man before her. This hermit, this recluse, this shattered soldier who had carved her uncle's name into his own flesh and carried his dog tags against his heart for 12 years. The cord hung free now, 8 pieces of stamped metal catching the mountain light. And something in the sheriff's face shifted from suspicion to something else entirely. Elias watched the young deputy crumple, and something inside him cracked open. A door he had welded shut 12 years ago. A room filled with faces he had tried to forget and failed every single day. Reeves, Navarro, was supporting her weight, his voice urgent. "Talk to me. What is happening?" She could not answer. Her eyes were fixed on the tag that hung at the center of the cord, the one that caught the light differently than the others because Elias touched it more often. The one with edges worn smooth from 12 years of being held in the dark hours before dawn. "Julian," she whispered. Julian Reeves. The name hit Elias like a round to the chest. He had spoken that name 1,000 times. 10,000. Had whispered it into the darkness of his cabin every night before sleep took him. Had shouted it into the wind on the eastern ridge where he went to apologize for surviving. But he had never heard it spoken by someone who loved the man it belonged to. He was your uncle. It was not a question. Elias could see it now. The resemblance he had noticed before made terrible sense. The eyes, the jaw, the way she carried herself with quiet determination. Doc had been the same way. Unshakable, present, the kind of man who ran toward the wounded while everyone else ran for cover. Deputy Reeves nodded, tears streaming down her face. "My mother's brother. He died when I was 17. They never told us how. Just that he was a hero. Just that he saved people." She looked up at Elias, and the rawness in her expression made him want to look away. "You knew him. I knew him." Elias's voice came out broken. "I served with him for 6 years. He was our medic, our document. He kept us alive through things that should have killed us a dozen times over." The 4 hikers had retreated to the edge of the clearing. Even Preston had lost his appetite for confrontation. They stood in a cluster, watching something they did not understand unfold before them. Something that made their complaints and their outrage seem impossibly small. Elias could have ended it there. Could have turned and walked back to his cabin. Could have retreated into the silence he had built around himself like a fortress. The deputy would have her answers eventually. The sheriff would fill in the gaps. He did not have to be here for this. But something held him in place. Something in the way she looked at him. Something in the desperate need he saw in her eyes. The same need he had carried for 12 years. The need to understand. The need to know what really happened. The need to hear the truth from someone who was there. He reached up slowly and lifted the cord over his head. The tags clinked together softly as he held them in his scarred palm. 8 names. 8 brothers. 8 men who deserved better than an unmarked grave in his memory. He separated one tag from the others and held it out to her. Deputy Reeves stared at it. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely take it from him. The metal was warm for being pressed against his chest. The stamped letters were worn, but still legible. Reeves, Julian T. OPOS. Catholic. This should have gone to his family, Elias said quietly. I should have found you years ago. I should have told you what he did. How he died. What he meant to all of us. She clutched the tag to her chest and wept. The sound was raw and broken, the kind of grief that had been waiting 12 years for release. Navarro stood watching, his own eyes wet. The hikers stood frozen, finally understanding that they had stumbled into something sacred, something that had nothing to do with property lines or trespassing or who owned what. Elias looked at the tag in the deputy's hands, and for the first time in 12 years, he felt something other than guilt. It was not relief, not absolution, but something close to purpose. He had carried these tags because he did not know what else to do with them, because giving them up meant admitting that his brothers were truly gone, because holding them close meant he could pretend, in the dark hours before dawn, that they were still with him. But they were not his to keep. They had never been his to keep. He looked at the remaining 7 tags in his palm. 7 names. 7 families. 7 people who deserved to know what their sons and brothers and husbands had done on a mountain 8,000 miles away. Maybe this was why he had stayed. Maybe this was why he had not retreated into the trees when the hikers first appeared. Maybe some part of him had known that the silence had to end eventually, that the debt he owed could not be paid by hiding. Deputy Reeves looked up at him, Julian's tag pressed against her heart. How'd he die? The question he had dreaded for 12 years. The question he had rehearsed answering 1,000 times in the darkness of his cabin. The question that had no answer that would ever be enough. He could have melted into the trees. He could have let them think what they wanted. But something about the deputy's face held him there. Something familiar he could not name. Elias drew a breath that seemed to pull air from somewhere deeper than his lungs. The question hung between them like a blade waiting to fall. How did he die? For words that contained 12 years of silence. For words that demanded an answer he had never spoken aloud to anyone outside a classified debriefing room. He died saving someone else. Elias's voice was steady now, the way it had been when he delivered after-action reports to generals who would never understand what the words really meant. That was who Julian was. That was who Doc was. He never stopped trying to save people, even when saving them meant he could not save himself. Deputy Reeves wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, but the tears kept coming. Tell me, please. I need to know. The hikers had gone completely still. Even Preston, whose entire worldview had been dismantled in the past 10 minutes, could not look away. There was something happening here that transcended their understanding. Something ancient and sacred and terrible. Elias looked at the remaining tags in his palm. 7 names. 7 stories. 7 endings that played on loop behind his eyes every time he closed them. We were on extraction, he began. October 14th, 2011. Hindu Kush Mountains, Kinnar Province. 8 of us. Our mission was to pull out an intelligence asset who had information on regional Taliban leadership. The kind of information that could save hundreds of lives. He paused, organizing the memories into something that could be spoken. The rally point was compromised. We did not know until we were already there. They hit us from 3 sides with everything they had. RPGs, small arms, 200 fighters, maybe more. Our point man went down in the first 10 seconds. Irish. Navarro said the name quietly. Donovan Keel. Elias nodded, surprised. You know the names. I told you. They teach this operation at Ranger School. The ambush. The fighting retreat. The 72 hours. His voice dropped. The sole survivor who carried his team leader's body off the mountain. Deputy Reeves looked between them, desperate for more. What about Julian? What about my uncle? Elias closed his eyes. Behind his lids, he could see it all. The muzzle flashes in the darkness. The screaming. The blood. The way Julian had looked at him in those final moments. We had wounded. Elias opened his eyes again. Terrence Okonkwo, our communications specialist. He took 3 rounds trying to reach the emergency frequency. Julian got to him first. Started working on him even while rounds were cracking past his head. That was document. That was your uncle. He never hesitated, never calculated the odds. Someone was hurt, and he was going to help them, full stop. Navarro was nodding slowly. The report said he stabilized 2 men under direct fire. He did. Elias's voice cracked for the first time. He saved Terrence, got him stable enough to move. And then he saw that I was hit. The words fell into silence. Deputy Reeves stared at him. You were hit? Elias pulled aside the torn collar of his jacket, revealing a scar that ran along his collarbone. Shrapnel. Took a piece of an RPG casing. I did not even feel it at first. Too much adrenaline. But Julian saw the blood. Saw me starting to slow down. And he left cover to get to me. No. Deputy Reeves shook her head. No. He crossed 15 meters of open ground with rounds hitting all around him. Elias's voice was barely a whisper now. He got to me. Got pressure on the wound. Told me I was going to be fine. And then a burst came through from the east. 3 rounds. He took all 3 of them. The clearing was silent, except for the sound of Deputy Reeves weeping. He died looking at me. Elias continued, because stopping now was impossible. Because the words had been dammed up for 12 years, and the dam had finally broken. His hands were still on my wound, still trying to save me. And his last words were the same thing he always said when one of us got hurt. You're going to be fine. Just breathe. I have got you. Preston made a sound. It might have been a sob. It might have been something else entirely. His phone was in his pocket now. The recording had stopped long ago. He saved my life. Elias looked at Deputy Reeves with eyes that held 12 years of grief and guilt and something that might have been gratitude. Your uncle died, saving my life. And I have spent every day since then trying to figure out how to deserve that. Deputy Reeves stepped forward. For a moment, Elias thought she might hit him, might scream at him, might demand to know why he had survived when Julian had not. Instead, she wrapped her arms around him and held on. It was the first human contact Elias had experienced in 6 years. The first kindness. The first moment of connection with another person since he had walked away from the world and into these mountains. His hand emerged from the jacket pocket holding papers. A deed, an ID, and something that made Preston's confident smile begin to falter. The embrace lasted longer than Elias expected. Long enough for something to shift inside his chest. Long enough for the rigid walls he had built around himself to develop cracks that might never fully heal. When Deputy Reeves finally stepped back, her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes held something other than grief. Something that looked almost like peace. Thank you, she whispered, for telling me, for carrying him all these years. Elias did not know how to respond. Gratitude was not something he had prepared for. Anger, yes. Blame, certainly. He had rehearsed responses to accusations 1,000 times in the darkness of his cabin. But no one had ever thanked him for surviving. Navarro cleared his throat. His voice was rough when he spoke. Mr. Crenshaw, I need to ask you something, and I need you to understand that I am asking as someone who served. Someone who knows what that insignia means. Someone who studied your operation and thought the man who lived through it was long dead. Elias met his eyes. Asked. The reports say the sole survivor of Operation Ridgeline killed 94 enemy combatants over 72 hours of continuous engagement. That he carried his team leader's body down 11,000 feet of hostile terrain. That he fought his way through multiple ambushes with diminishing ammunition until he was using a knife. Navarro paused. The reports say that man received the Distinguished Service Cross and multiple classified commendations before disappearing from all records. Is it you? The clearing seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind had stopped. Elias reached into the inside pocket of his torn jacket. His fingers found the documents he had carried with him since the day he bought this land. Insurance, he had told himself. Proof, in case anyone ever questioned his right to disappear. He pulled out a folded paper first, aged and soft from years of being kept close to his body. He handed it to Navarro without a word. The sheriff unfolded it carefully. His eyes moved across the text. The official letterhead. The signature at the bottom. The words that described actions so far beyond normal human capacity that they read like fiction. This is from the Secretary of Defense, Navarro said quietly. His hands were trembling. This is a personal commendation. Classified until 2019. Elias nodded. Navarro read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. For extraordinary heroism in combat operations against an armed enemy of the United States. Master Sergeant Elias Crenshaw, call sign Timberwolf, demonstrated unprecedented courage and tactical excellence during a 72-hour fighting withdrawal under continuous enemy contact. His actions directly resulted in the elimination of 94 enemy combatants and the successful recovery of 7 fallen teammates. His refusal to abandon his team leader's remains, despite life-threatening wounds and overwhelming enemy presence, represents the highest traditions of the United States Army and Special Operations Command. Deputy Reeves covered her mouth with her hand. Preston had gone completely white. His legs seemed uncertain beneath him. Navarro looked up from the letter. His eyes were wet. Timberwolf. He said the name like a prayer. My God, they told us you died on that mountain. Elias shook his head slowly. I died in a lot of ways, just not the one they put in the reports. He reached into his pocket again and produced a military identification card, worn at the edges. The photograph showing a younger man with harder eyes. The unit designation scratched out per protocol, but the name still visible. Crenshaw, Elias J. Message, USA. Navarro took the ID with reverent hands, compared the photograph to the weathered face before him. The eyes were the same, older now, haunted in ways the photograph could not capture, but unmistakably the same. Why here? Deputy Reeves asked. Why this mountain? Why alone? Elias looked past her toward the eastern ridge where he went every morning at 0347 to speak to the men who could no longer answer. My team leader made me promise. Before he died, he told me to find my mountain. He told me to live. He paused. This was the only way I knew how. The silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, just heavy with the weight of understanding. Brock spoke for the first time in what felt like hours. His voice was small and broken. We did not know. We thought you were just some homeless guy. We thought you were crazy. We thought. He could not finish. Could not find words to bridge the gap between who they had assumed Elias was and who he actually was. Timberwolf. The sheriff's voice cracked on the words. My God, they told us you died on that mountain. Elias looked at the faces surrounding him and felt something shift in the air. The clearing that had been a battlefield of egos and accusations had transformed into something else entirely. A confessional, a memorial, a place where truth had finally clawed its way into the light. You want to know what happened? He said. All of it. Not just Julian. Not just the pieces that fit into reports and commendations. No one moved. No one breathed. He began with the coordinates. 35.2847 degrees north. 71.1753 degrees east. Hindu Kush Mountain Range, Kinnar Province, Afghanistan. October 14th through 17th, 2011. Operation Ridgeline. Classified until 2019. The words came out with the precision of an after-action report. Cold. Clinical. The only way he could speak them without breaking. We inserted at 2,200 hours on October 13th, 8 operators. Timber Element. Our objective was an intelligence asset embedded with a Taliban cell operating in the high valleys. The asset had information on regional leadership that could have ended operations in that province within 6 months. He paused, letting the context settle. Extraction was scheduled for 0000 hours on October 15th. Rally point was a clearing at 11,000 feet, accessible by helicopter if the weather held. We reached the asset on schedule, secured the intelligence, began movement toward extraction at 1900 hours. His voice dropped. The rally point was compromised. We never found out how. Informant in the village. Intercepted communications. Maybe just bad luck. By the time we reached the clearing, they had 200 fighters positioned on 3 sides with RPGs and heavy machine guns. Vanessa had lowered her phone completely now. Her hand was shaking. Irish went down first. Donovan Keel. Point man. Best I ever worked with. RPG caught him cinemass. He was dead before he hit the ground. 26 years old. His daughter was born 3 weeks after we deployed. He never got a hold of her. Deputy Reeves clutched her uncle's dog tag tighter. Hammer was next. Marcus Webb. He saw the grenade land in our center, and he made a choice. Threw himself on top of it. Absorbed the blast with his own body. Saved 4 of us. 31 years old. His mother still sent him cookies every month. Oatmeal raisin. His favorite. Preston's knees buckled. He caught himself against a tree, but barely. Sparks. Terrence Okonkwo. Communications. Took 3 rounds in the back, trying to reach the emergency frequency. Julian got to him first. Stabilized him under fire. But there was nothing anyone could do when the second wave hit. Sparks died, trying to call for help that would come 47 hours too late. Elias touched the tags in his palm. For names down. For more to go. Shade. Aaron Whitmore. Sniper. Best shot I ever saw. He had been awake for 36 hours when his hands started shaking. He missed 1 target. Just 1. And that target killed 2 more of us before Shade put him down. He never forgave himself. He was still apologizing when he bled out from the wounds he took doing it. The silence in the clearing was absolute. Boom! Randall Cobb. Demolitions. He used his last charge to collapse a tunnel the enemy was using to flank us. Bought us 3 more hours. He died at dawn holding a photograph of his twin sons. They were 4 years old. He promised them he would be home for their birthday. Deputy Reeves was weeping openly now. So was Navarro. Bridge. Dariush Ahmadi. Our interpreter. He was not supposed to be on this mission. Volunteered because he knew the dialect. When the enemy overran our position on the second night, he stood in front of the intelligence asset and took 6 rounds. Died protecting a stranger because that stranger had information that might save American lives. Elias's voice cracked for the first time. And then there was Vic, Captain Nathan Vickers, our team leader, my brother. He took 7 rounds on the second evening, pushing me out of the kill zone I should have seen coming. He died in my arms telling me it was not my fault, telling me to find my mountain, telling me to live. He looked at the 7 tags still in his palm. I carried him down the remaining 3,000 feet, through 2 more firefights, with a knife when the ammunition ran out. I killed 94 men trying to stop me from bringing my brother home. And when the helicopter finally came, 47 hours late, I was the only one standing. The clearing was silent except for the sound of weeping. They gave me medals, commendations, a letter from the Secretary of Defense. They told me I was a hero. He shook his head slowly. I was not a hero. I was the one who lived. And I have spent every day since then trying to understand why. The silence that followed was absolute. But for Deputy Reeves, staring at the tag with her uncle's name, the real revelation was just beginning. The mountain held its breath in the aftermath of Elias's words. No one moved. No one spoke. The weight of what they had just heard pressed down on the clearing like a physical force, compressing everything into a single moment of terrible clarity. Preston was the first to break. His legs gave out completely, and he slid down the tree trunk until he was sitting in the dirt, his $3,000 hiking jacket collecting pine needles and soil. His face had gone from white to gray, and his hands would not stop shaking. I did not know. He whispered. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement was gone. Everything that had defined him an hour ago had been stripped away, leaving only a man confronting the magnitude of his own ignorance. I called you a vagrant. I called you crazy. I filmed you for entertainment. Elias looked at him. There was no anger in his expression, no satisfaction, just the quiet exhaustion of a man who had carried too much for too long. You saw what you expected to see. Brock had deleted his recording. His fingers had moved automatically, erasing the evidence of his cruelty before his conscious mind had fully processed what he was doing. He stood at the edge of the clearing with his arms wrapped around himself, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face. Those men, he said, the ones you carried, they had families. All of them. Elias looked down at the tags in his palm. Wives, children, parents, brothers and sisters, people who got a folded flag and a letter and nothing else. No answers, no closure, just silence. Deputy Reeves stepped forward. She still held Julian's tag against her heart, the metal warming against her chest the way it had warmed against Elias's for 12 years. "My mother," she said quietly. "She lights a candle for him every year on October 14th. She never knew what happened. The army told us he died a hero, but they never said how. Never said who was with him. Never said who he saved. Elias met her eyes. He saved me. And I spent 12 years hiding in these mountains instead of finding his family and telling them that. You were hurting." Navarro's voice was thick with emotion. "You were carrying something no one should have to carry alone. That is not an excuse." "No." Deputy Reeves shook her head. "It is not, but it is an explanation. And now you have the chance to do something different." She held out her hand, not demanding, not accusing, just offering. 7 families, she said. 7 dog tags. 7 people who deserve to know what their loved ones did, what they meant, how they died. Elias looked at the tags in his palm. 7 names. 7 deaths. 7 conversations he had avoided for 12 years because he was afraid. Afraid of their anger. Afraid of their grief. Afraid of seeing in their eyes the confirmation of what he already believed about himself. That he should have died with them. That surviving was its own kind of failure. "My mother would want to meet you." Deputy Reeves's voice was gentle. "She would want to thank you for being with him, for carrying his memory." The words hit Elias like a physical blow. Thank him. For 12 years, he had imagined what Julian's family would say if they knew he was alive. He had imagined accusations, demands for explanation, questions about why their son and brother was dead while this stranger still breathed. He had never imagined gratitude. Vanessa stepped forward hesitantly. Her phone was in her pocket now, forgotten. Her face was streaked with mascara and tears, and she looked nothing like the polished influencer who had narrated his humiliation an hour ago. "I am sorry," she said. The words came out broken. "I'm so sorry. I did not see you. I looked right at you, and I did not see anything." Elias nodded slowly. Most people do not. Chad and Brock moved to stand beside her. The 4 hikers who had arrived as antagonists now stood as something else entirely. Witnesses, mourners, people whose understanding of the world had been fundamentally altered. Navarro straightened his shoulders. The professional mask was back in place, but his eyes were still wet. "Mr. Crenshaw, Elias, what happens now is up to you. These folks will be leaving this mountain, and they will not be coming back." He glanced at Preston, who nodded weakly. "That much I can guarantee." "And you?" Elias asked. "That depends." The sheriff's voice was careful. "There is a man who has been leaving supplies at the edge of your property for the past 3 years. Dr. Franklin Yates. He runs a retreat for special operations veterans about 40 miles from here. He asked me to pass along a message if I ever got the chance." Elias said nothing. He knew about the supplies. Had found them every few months. Canned goods, thermal blankets, medical kits. He had never touched them. "The door is open," Navarro continued. "That is what he wanted me to tell you. Whenever you are ready. No pressure. No paperwork. Just a place where people who have seen what you have seen can talk without being judged." She held out her hand. Not with questions. Not with demands. Just an offering from the family of a fallen brother. And for the first time in 12 years, Elias did not turn away. 3 months later, Elias stood at the edge of a different clearing. This one was 40 miles from his mountain, nestled in a valley where the Blue Ridge softened into rolling hills. A farmhouse sat at its center, white paint weathered by decades of seasons, a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Smoke curled from the chimney. Voices drifted through the open windows. Dr. Franklin Yates had been right. The door was open. It had been open all along. Elias had not come easily. The first month after the confrontation on his property, he had retreated deeper into his cabin, closed the shutters, locked the door, tried to pretend that nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Deputy Cassandra Reeves came to visit on the 3rd Sunday. She brought her mother, Eleanor, a small woman with Julian's eyes and a quiet strength that reminded Elias of the medic who had saved his life. They sat on the porch of his cabin for 3 hours. Eleanor held her brother's dog tag and wept and thanked Elias for carrying him when no one else could. He had not known what to do with her gratitude, had not known how to accept the embrace she offered before she left. But something cracked open in his chest that day. Something that had been frozen for 12 years began, slowly, to thaw. The second family came 2 weeks later. Marcus Webb's mother, Irene, drove up from Georgia with her surviving son. She brought photographs of Hammer as child, brought the last letter he had written home, brought oatmeal raisin cookies because she did not know how else to say what she needed to say. Elias told her how her son had died, told her about the grenade, about the choice Marcus had made in the space between one heartbeat and the next, about the 4 men who were alive because her son had decided that their lives mattered more than his own. She held his hands when he finished, looked into his eyes, and said the words he had never expected to hear. Thank you for being with him. Thank you for bringing him home. By the end of the second month, Elias had met with 5 of the 7 families. Each conversation broke something open inside him. Each embrace healed something he had thought was beyond repair. He learned that Nathan Vickers' widow had remarried, but still kept Vic's photograph on her nightstand. That Donovan Keel's daughter, now 14, had his smile and his stubborn determination. That Randall Cobb's twin sons had joined the Army on their 18th birthday, following a father they could barely remember. The grief did not disappear. The guilt did not evaporate, but it transformed. It became something he could carry without being crushed, something that connected him to the living instead of anchoring him to the dead. Dr. Yates had watched all of this unfold with patient eyes. He never pushed, never demanded, just opened his door and waited for Elias to walk through when he was ready. The retreat was not what Elias had expected. There were no therapy sessions with clipboards and structured exercises. No group circles where everyone was forced to share. Just a farmhouse full of men and women who had seen things no one should see and survived things no one should survive. They cooked meals together, worked the land together, sat on the porch in the evenings, and sometimes talked about what they carried, and sometimes just watched the stars in silence. Elias spoke for the first time on his 4th week there, stood up after dinner, and said words he had never spoken to anyone. My name is Elias Crenshaw. Call sign was Timberwolf, and I lost my brothers because I missed a position I should have seen coming. No one told him it was not his fault. No one offered platitudes or easy absolution. They just nodded. They understood. They carried their own versions of the same weight. Now, 3 months after 4 strangers had stumbled onto his property and changed everything, Elias stood at the edge of the clearing and watched the sun set over the valley. Deputy Reeves was inside, helping prepare dinner. She came every Sunday now, sometimes with her mother, sometimes alone, always with stories about Julian, the ones from before, the ones that made Elias laugh instead of weep. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that the people who carry the heaviest burdens often do so in silence, please subscribe to our channel. Share in the comments. Have you ever encountered someone whose humble appearance hid an extraordinary story? Sometimes the greatest warriors are the ones who stepped away from the wars they won. Thank you for watching. He pulled the cord of dog tags from beneath his shirt. 6 now, not 7. Julians had gone home with Eleanor. The other families would receive theirs soon. He was not ready to let go of all of them yet, but he was learning. The door behind him opened. Dr. Yates stepped onto the porch with 2 cups of coffee, handed one to Elias without a word. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. Still here, brothers. Elias spoke the words aloud for the first time in front of another living person. Finally stopped apologizing. She tells me stories about Julian now, the ones from before. I think you would like her. I think you would want to keep going. So I will. The stars emerged one by one. The voices from inside the farmhouse rose and fell in easy conversation. And Elias Crenshaw, call sign Timberwolf, the man who had survived the deadliest special operations mission of the Afghan war, finally allowed himself to believe that surviving might not be a betrayal. It might just be the beginning.